Right, hiya, it's Dave the HGV Driver back again on the little bit of a subject of would you really want to be a truck driver in the UK in 2021. This little video, I'm going to keep it short. Like I say, there will be quite a lot of these bobbing along as we go along on different subjects and what have you, and I might tell you some stories in some other ones of some of the experiences that have happened to me over the years. But what I wanted to talk to you today about was driver's hours. Now, if you work in an office, if you work in a factory, it's a totally different kettle of fish to actually being a truck driver. For the simple reason is when you're a truck driver, you're committed to completing your work of sorts. I mean, obviously there's only so far so many hours you can do in a day, but as you'll see, and as I explained to you, you'll see how ridiculously they can be distorted. And let's say in my opinion, I think that it's totally out of order and it should never be allowed to have been done. But between the governments of countries, between large employers, and possibly from the pressure of some drivers who would rather work 60 hours a week for a low wage than work 48 hours a week for a good wage, because they believe that if they're doing overtime they're actually earning more money. But if they worked it properly and we were paid properly for the job that we do, then you wouldn't have to work that amount of hours. But there would still be people, and I suppose you'll see these in every walk of life, it wouldn't matter if they were getting paid £100 an hour, they'd still want more and more overtime, because obviously it's just natural human greed, I suppose. It's just the way it is. If you get £15 an hour, £10 an hour, you will buy a £100,000 house. If you get £100 an hour, you'll buy a £1 million house maybe. So all you'll do is you'll just go up with the grade of whatever you're getting paid to whatever you can afford. So rather than having a nice life so let's say you did have the £100 an hour, rather than having a nice life and buying a £500,000 house, some people have the persuasion to go and buy the £1 million house and still be scratching for money. Whereas I've been totally the opposite from that. The first house I bought cost me 18,363, and we moved on from that to another house which the first house paid for, etc, etc. So we've never actually been in more debt than we were at the beginning of our home building life. So we've moved up with the house prices, so we're still in the same position, apart from the fantastic position that I'm in is that I've paid my mortgage off and I'm perfectly happy where I am. So I don't do overtime anymore. I don't do overtime, I don't do favours, and I just do what I have to do to earn the money that it takes for me to have a decent life and no more. Because at the end of the day, as I've always said, from being 25-30 years old, the only pocket there is in a shroud is for your wedding ring. You certainly can't take your money with you, and why would you spend all your life scrimping and scraping and earning money for somebody else to have a whale of a time on it and never have to work? It don't make sense to me. It's just not the way that I was brought up. Right, anyway, today's subject is driver's hours. A driver's working week is 48 hours. That is meant to be the legal maximum for a working week. So 48 hours. Now, if you work in an office, you probably do 37, 38 hours. If you're in a factory, maybe you might do 38 to 42 hours. A driver, and like 99.9% of drivers, are actually contracted to 48 hours. So you're expected to work a minimum of 48 hours a week, which is, in my opinion, is long enough. You know what I mean? You shouldn't really be working any more than that. However, like I say, with the cooperation of governments, the EU and big companies, they've decided that you don't only have to work 9.36 hours a day, because that's 48 divided by 5 is 9.36 hours, so that's 9 hours and 36 minutes. No, what you can do is you can work up to 15 hours a day. What we'll do is we'll make it so as you can work up to 15 hours a day, not 9.5 to, let's say, 10.5, to allow you a little bit of leeway for if you need to stay out and to get your job completed. No, what we'll do is we've decided, as the EU and as the big companies and our government, will allow you to work 15 hours. Now, bearing in mind, 15 hours, that sounds like a massively long day, doesn't it? And it is, especially when you consider what we do. And that 15 hours a day can entail both driving, so you can drive, you're supposed to drive, your legal maximum driving in a day is 9 hours. So you've got 2 4.5 hour shots, but they allow you to extend that to 10 hours driving. So if you think to yourself, and you work in an office and you work 8 hours and you're tired, right, and you think to yourself, God, I'm absolutely knackered driving this computer. Can you imagine what it's like to drive an HGV for that, but another hour on top of that, plus your loading and unloading? And that's what takes you up to your 15 hours. So if you do a massively physical job like I used to do, you could spend, like I say, 9 hours driving, or 8 hours driving, or 7 hours driving, and the rest of it, all the way up to 15, actually skull dragging 100 kilo stacks up and down a vehicle. And once you've loaded it, you're sweating, the sweat's dripping off you, you feel horrible, and then you're expected to get in the vehicle, drive 2 hours, and then do it all again. So you're dripping in sweat again. You get into your cab again. You, like I say, you're sweating. You feel horrible. You're absolutely knackered, and then you're supposed to sit and have your dinner, and you get a whopping 45 minutes. After that, after all that, driving down there, loading it, driving down, tipping it, and then you get a whopping 45 minutes to have a break. And your employer will expect you to only have 45 to 50 minutes. 45, 50 minutes, because the reason they say have 50 minutes is because if you have, it's absolutely crazy, if you have 44 minutes and 59 seconds, you can get an £100 fine. So if you have 1 minute or 1 second or 5 seconds short of your 45 minutes, what used to be called VOSA and now is the DVSA, if they catch you, can give you a fine of £100. And these fines come thick and fast, and I'll be telling you about a few more of them, a few more like crazy ways that they can fine you, and way that you can be given infringements and tickets and what have you for what you do. And this is what I've been trying to explain to you right the way throughout this series. Is it really worth being an HGV driver, being paid as a working class man? So basically, just above the bottom, you've got your national minimum wage. The top national minimum wage now is approaching £10. I'm probably on about £14 an hour. So, but the responsibility and the actual responsibility that you've got, the duties that you're expected to perform, i.e. really, really heavy labour as well as driving. So you're not only driving, you're heavy labour, you're governed to within an inch of your life. Everything that you do, you can be fined for. Everything that you do, you can lose your licence for. So it's just an absolute minefield. You can extend your days, which should be 9.36. If you divide it, you can extend those to 15. Which means obviously if you work 15, you've only got 9 hours off before you come in the next day. So we used to have 2 lads that worked with us many years ago when we were at TNT Stroke Seaver, and those 2 lads lived in Fleetwood in Blackpool. So they lived in Fleetwood and we worked in Stockport. So it was an hour to an hour and 5 minutes drive for them to get into work in the morning. So you can imagine, you get up in the morning, you drive an hour and 5 minutes, you get into work, you work a an absolute torturous 15-hour day, and then you've got to drive an hour and 5 minutes back to Blackpool. So you've got 15, 16, 17 hours you've been out the door. So then obviously you've got 7 hours back at home to do what you've got to do. So a normal sleep is 8 hours, so you're an hour short of that straight away. But when you get through the front door, you don't just want to walk straight up the stairs and collapse into bed, because you might have kids, you more than likely have a wife, You'll more than likely have a life, but not a life really. It's not. You don't really have a life if you're working for a lot of employers as a driver. And then obviously you come home, you've got to have a shower because you stink, you're minging, you've got all the toils of the day, all your muscles are aching and everything, so you go and spend 10-15 minutes in the shower, then you come downstairs, you have something to eat, you watch the TV, so now you've got 6 hours left of your break. So that's if you do all that in an hour. So have a shower, have something to eat, sit and watch the telly and talk to your wife in the space of an hour, and then you can go and have 5 hours kip. Woohoo! So is this starting to dawn onto you just how safe a job this is? And just how they turned round years and years ago and said that they were capping the hours because drivers were falling asleep at the wheel? And what they've done is they've put all these restrictions in and then put caveats in, so the restrictions don't mean a shite, they don't mean a thing, they don't mean a toss, none of them, because you can still be worked to within an inch of your life 3 days a week and then the other 2 days a week. I mean, I don't know what it's like now because I know the rules have changed very slightly very recently because of COVID and what have you, and they're talking about being able to do an easier class 1 licence and all this, that and the other, and they're also talking about the government opening the hours up so you can drive more hours. So they want you to drive more hours. So, but what are they going to expect you to do? Work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Is that what they're going to do? Turn around and say, well, at the moment you're allowed to work 15 hours 3 days a week, and then the other 2 days, really by rights you're meant to do 11, but when we were with TNT Seaver, working you to the legal maximum meant 3 15-hour days and then 2 13-hour days, and then the week after you'd do 2 13-hour days and 2 11-hour days. So as you can see, it's not a glamorous life, it's not a nice life, and I tell you what, I wish I had a quid for every truck driver that I know that went out on a thingy on a Monday morning, came back on a Friday and his missus weren't there and the house was empty. I've heard that story so many times, and drivers just sacrifice their whole life, they lose the kids, they lose the wife and everything, all to make a living. And again, the question is it actually worth being a truck driver in 2021? The next subject that I'm going to talk to you about is the fines. And the fines you can get for the ridiculous stuff that's totally or almost totally out of your control. When you clock in of a morning, so you come into work and you swipe in or clock in, we swipe in where I work. So you swipe in and the clock is faulty. Right, so you go to swipe in, the clock doesn't register your swiping, or the clock doesn't work at all, it's not switched on, it's broke. You go into the office and you say to them, oh, the clock's not working. Yeah, we know, just carry on. So anyway, you carry on, and then 3 weeks later you get an infringement for not clocking in. You go to your manager and say, hang on a minute, I couldn't clock in this day, the clock was broke. Well, yeah, but you've still got to sign it, it's an infringement. There's a discrepancy between when you clocked in or when you were meant to clock in to when you put the actual thing in the tacho head, because ours is like a card, and when you put it in, it asks you what time you clocked in, and you've got to be accurate on that to within 2 minutes. At our company, you have to be accurate within 2 minutes. If you're any more than 2 minutes adrift either side, so what I do is I take a photograph of it every day, and do you know something, it still gives me infringements, even when I've got photographic evidence to prove that I've clocked in and I've clocked out. They look at it and they go, no, you still got to sign it. They're giving you an infringement, and they're insisting that that infringement is right and proper when they know absolutely that it isn't. And that, to me, I think that is fraud. I think that is illegal, and they shouldn't be allowed to do that. Yet they do. They give you infringements they blame you basically for things that you haven't done. And they're the ones with the power. They hand you the piece of paper, they're telling you to sign it. If you refuse to sign it, then obviously it looks bad on you from them. They think that you're a trouble causer. Or if you do sign it, then if VOSA pull you, classed as proper infringements, then you would be fined £100 a piece for them. So moving on from there, we've gone out, we've gone to his truck, we've put his tachograph card in the head, we've done what we need to do. We've got everything straight there, and we go around to do our daily checks. So you've got 10 minutes to do the daily checks on your vehicle, which is a walk round check. However, you've got a PDA, or sometimes you do it on a paper sheet. We used to do them on paper sheets, now we've got a computer machine, and it's got about 30 boxes, and some of those boxes have got 2 or 3 items in them that you've got to tick that are correct before you go out. So you've got 10 minutes to do this, and a lot of it is obviously you learn. At our place, every one of our vehicles is roadworthy. They might not be the prettiest vehicles in the world, but they're all pretty much spot on, and it's very rare you actually find anything wrong with them. I do have to say, it's very rare that you do find anything wrong with them. They are good vehicles. They're not, like I say, they're not the prettiest things to look at, but they are all 100% roadworthy. And if you do have a defect, you put it in and they do it straight away. You go round to the garage, if it's something they can repair straight away, they will repair it straight away for you. But talking on the other side and in general, if you walk around your truck and you tick those things off, and the DVSA stop you, and there's something, let's say, wrong with your steering, but something that you could not know about, you will still be fined for it. You will still be done for it, because it's a driver's responsibility. If you've got a tyre that's defective, don't forget these tyres are massive, and a good portion of them sits on the concrete. So when you're going around your vehicle checking your tyres, you put your hand around the back of them, you feel into the treads to make sure that there's at least a millimetre on them, which on ours probably more like about 14 millimetres on them all. They're really, really good tyres. But as you go round, there could be a chunk missing out of that tyre, and if that chunk out of that tyre is actually sat on the tarmac or on the concrete at the time when you go and check those wheels, obviously you think, right, okay, that's fine, that's no problem. You go out on it, you get stopped by the DVSA, and they give you £100 fine for that tyre. So it's your responsibility. Every time that you go out in an HGV vehicle, a class 1, a class 2 or a class 3, it doesn't matter. Every time you go out in that vehicle, there's potentially things there that you could know nothing about, and you could lose your licence for them. So basically, what I'm saying to you is they can take your livelihood away from you at the drop of an hat whenever they want. And they will, if they want to find something, they will find something that's wrong with your vehicle. If they want to do that, that's exactly what they'll do. So anyway, that's that little section. All the stuff that you can be fined for, everything from to not taking enough rest between shifts, to not taking enough rest over a weekend, so not having enough hours, and the one that is the real bugbear and very, very difficult is if you're a night driver. Now, if you haven't signed out of the working time directive, which is another thing I could go into, and I could probably do another half an hour on, the working time directive. It's another veil of bullshit, basically. But if you haven't signed out the working time directive, you're only allowed to work 10 hours of a night time. But that's not including your break. You know, EU companies, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, yeah, you can work another 45 minutes. So basically, you can work 10 hours and 45 minutes at night time. But if you've signed out of the working time directive, and the government have said on many, many occasions that night drivers are far more vulnerable than drivers during the day. But if you sign out of that working time directive, they can work you 15 hours overnight, which again is obscene, absolutely obscene. They should not be allowed to do that in any way, shape or form, but they can. So you can work 15 hours of a night, but if you haven't signed out of that working time directive, you've got to have a minimum of 12 hours off in each 24-hour period, which might sound, oh, that's pretty simple. If you finish at 2 in the morning, that means that you can't start till 2 in the afternoon. Well, no, it doesn't work like that, because when you finish, those 2 hours after midnight have to be added onto the the time that you start in the following day. So it's like, it's one of the most complicated things I've ever come across in my life, and I fell foul of it twice. It was 2 o'clock, was it 2 o'clock in the morning? No, it was about 4 o'clock in the morning. It was about 4 o'clock in the morning. I asked them, and they said, oh yeah, you're all right, it's not a problem. Obviously there's no driving assessors in or anybody with any authority, so you just have to take their word for it, and the word that you believe is right. And then obviously it turns out to be wrong, and potentially I could have been fined up to £1,000 for that, and I could have lost my licence. So that just shows you, is it really worth it for 11, 12, 14 quid an hour, 16 quid an hour? You've got to make your mind up whether it's actually worth the risks that are involved in it. Don't forget, as I mentioned in the first video, it's not only all this about the tipping and the hours and what I'll do in the next video is I'll tell you some stories of what's happened to me and some of the hours that I've done and the jobs that I've done, and that should be quite interesting for you. But you've got to fathom out to yourself whether it's actually worth it. You're 18 inches from the end of your life every time you get in that cab, because there's about 18 inches 2 foot between you and the windscreen. If anything hits that windscreen of any substance, so if you run in the back of another lorry, it's good night Vienna. If you go, say you're going over Woodhead or one of the passes with steep drops on either side, if you lose control or if somebody does something to you that causes you to swerve and go over those barriers and go down that hill, it's good night Vienna. It's such a dangerous job, and that's without even talking about if you break down on the side of the motorway and somebody runs into the back of your truck. If you have a blowout, as you can imagine, if you've seen the actual tyres on an HGV, if you have a blowout, it's a serious occurrence. You can be all over the road. You can take half a dozen cars out and take yourself out as well. So it's one of them. I don't want to put anybody off from being an HGV driver, but I only think that it's right that you go into it with your eyes open. And you'll find that on all these videos there's nobody that's turning around and saying what I'm saying isn't right, because it is right. As I said in the first video, I've been an HGV driver for a quarter of a century. I've been a union shop steward. I've been a branch secretary for HER2, the United Road Transport Union. I went to Ruskin University at Oxford, so Ruskin Oxford, to do my qualifications to be a union branch secretary. I did that for about 2.5 to 3 years, did wage negotiations, lots of work on the working time directive, lots of work on the night time directive, when we were trying to find solutions to some of the problems that the company had at the time to try and get it so as we could cover for the jobs that needed doing at the times that they needed doing. So just meant hiring more drivers and what have you, which is something that they don't want to do now. They just want everybody to do more and more hours, and that's what they're saying about the driver crisis. They're just expecting the HGV drivers that are here to do crazy hours. What are they going to expect us to do? Work 24 hours a day and drive 17 hours out of that? What are they going to do to increase drivers' hours? You can't do that. If you do that, people are going to die. Right, so what we'll do is we'll leave it there for this one, and like I say, I think the next one what I'll do is I'll go in and I'll tell you some stories. What we'll do is I'll start telling you some stories about some of the encounters and some of the fun and not so fun bits that I've had being an HGV driver. So we'll see you in the next video.